and welcome. Wherever you're tuning in from, thank you so much for joining us. You're watching the approach and docking coverage of the AX-1 mission currently in progress. I'm Trisha Bhattacharya, a crew systems group lead at Axiom Space, and with me is Andy Tran, a quality engineer here at SpaceX. The AX-1 mission is the first all-private crew to the International Space Station. Our four-person Axiom crew will experience 10 days in orbit, 8 days on board the International Space Station, and they are currently en route to their destination. This webcast is a joint broadcast between NASA, SpaceX, and Axiom Space, and we'll walk you through the events of Dragon approaching and docking with the ISS and carry our coverage through the welcome ceremony that awaits the crew once they are on board the International Space Station.
The AX-1 mission started yesterday, April 8th, in the early hour mornings of Florida when the Axiom crew arrived at Kennedy Space Center. From there, the SpaceX team transported the crew to the Falcon support building for pre-launch briefings and then helped the AX-1 astronauts suit up in preparation for heading to the launch vehicle. Upon arriving at the launch pad, the crew ascended the 265-foot fixed service structure, crossed the crew access arm to board the Dragon capsule. After performing final checkouts, including suit leak checks and comms checks, the closeout teams departed the pad in preparation for launch. At 8:17 a.m. Pacific time, Dragon lifted off from historic pad 39A, and that is what you're seeing on screen right now. We had a beautiful day yesterday. Shortly afterwards, we had successful stage separation. Our Falcon 9 first stage returned to Earth for a landing on our drone ship, a Shortfall of Gravitas, and the Dragon spacecraft successfully separated from the Falcon 9 second stage and deployed its nose cone.
Since that time, the Axiom crew has been able to eat some of the food specially prepared for them by Chef Jose Andres and his team and get some rest in anticipation for the docking event you'll see later on this broadcast. Just a few short hours ago, the crew hosted a live on-orbit event from inside of the Dragon spacecraft. We were able to get an inside look into the Dragon cabin interior, hear the crew's thoughts and their excitement on their launch experience, and get introduced to the zero-G indicator caramel given to Mark from one of his partnered research institutions. Before we take you to the teams at Johnson Space Center who are actively monitoring Endeavour's progress, let's meet the crew of AX-1. The AX-1 mission is commanded by retired NASA astronaut Michael López-Alegría, a Spanish-American who was born in Madrid, Spain, and has also called Mission Viejo, California, as well as Boston, Massachusetts, home. Michael is a U.S. Navy captain and has flown 3 times aboard the Space Shuttle and once aboard Soyuz. He has conducted 10 spacewalks in his career, accumulating 67 hours and 40 minutes in the vacuum of space, both of which are NASA records. In 2021, he was inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame.
The pilot for AX-1 is Larry Connor from Dayton, Ohio. Larry is an entrepreneur and a nonprofit activist investor. He has won aerobatic flying competitions and summited both Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Rainier. Through AX-1, he will become the first private pilot to reach the International Space Station. He will also become the first human to reach both the deepest ocean depths and enter the bounds of outer space within 1 year. Larry has been actively involved with the Mayo Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic for many years, helping to understand the effects of aging. This mission will add a new dimension to several of these studies.
Serving as Mission Specialist 1, Eytan Stibbe is now the second Israeli ever to fly to space. Eytan served for more than 4 decades as a fighter pilot in the Israeli Air Force, where he received the Distinguished Aviator Medal, and today he is an impact investor and philanthropist. In collaboration with the Ramon Foundation, the Israel Space Agency, and the Ministry of Innovation, Science, and Technology, as well as the Ministry of Education, Stibbe is flying to the ISS under the Rakia banner and the maxim, "There is no dream beyond reach." During his time on the ISS, Stibbe will facilitate scientific experiments, educational outreach, as well as artistic activities.
And completing our crew, Mark Pathy is an entrepreneur, investor, and philanthropist, as well as the mission specialist number 2 on this AX-1 mission. Pathy is currently the chief executive officer and chairman of Montreal-based Maverick, a privately owned investing and financing company he founded that focuses on innovation and social impact. As a strong believer in the importance of philanthropy, Pathy is a member of the boards and executive committees of the Montreal Children's Hospital Foundation, Don LaRue, and the Pathy Family Foundation. Through the AX-1 mission, Pathy has become Canada's second private astronaut and the 12th Canadian to go to space.
Yesterday, we had a beautiful launch. It was really picture-perfect conditions, blue skies, fluffy white clouds, and just, we couldn't really ask for anything better. The crew had an exciting launch time, and now they're on their journey to the ISS. So with that, let's head over to NASA's Dan Hewitt, who's joining us from JSC's Mission Control Room for a closer look at Dragon's flight to the International Space Station. Dan?
Hey, thanks, Trish, and great to see you and Andy this morning, and welcome everybody as we get ready to go through the final phases of the approach and docking for the AX-1 mission. It's been about 18 hours and change so far since they lifted off. They've executed a series of burns to get them where they are, and we're just now getting into those final parts. And so, as you just heard, the crew on board AX-1 right now is getting into their suits. They're going to wear these.
Everybody is in their suits.
It sounds like they're in their suits. So they're going to wear those throughout all the different dynamic phases. Obviously, right here during the docking, they also wore them during launch, and then they'll wear them towards the end of the mission with undocking and then that entry, descent, and landing. But I want to go through some of the burns that we've done so far to get us to where we are right now. And everything started after we got on orbit, and we were able to start executing a series of 5 different burns to get us up here, the first of which being the phase burn. So that just started the initial raising of Dragon's orbit and positioning it for its actual approach up to the International Space Station. And then about 12 hours after that, the boost burn took place. Now, the boost burn is raising Dragon's orbital apogee, or the highest point of its orbit, and it raised it all the way up until it was just about 10 kilometers below the International Space Station, not putting it directly below, but just in altitude about 10 kilometers below. And throughout all these burns, we're using the Draco thrusters on board Dragon. There's 16 of these. There's 12 around the service section and 4 on what's known as the forward bulkhead. Those are the ones that are essentially pointing straight out through the top hatch and are used for all of these major, we call them delta velocity burns, the ones that are really pushing the vehicle and doing altitude changes. So we did that boost burn, and that put it about 10 kilometers lower than the station, and then just after that we did what's known as the close co-elliptic burn. So that put us on our first co-elliptic orbit with the space station. That's just where you're maintaining a pretty circular orbit around planet Earth and then maintaining just about 10 kilometers in altitude below the space station. After that was done, we were able to get to the transfer burn. That again just raised the orbit one more time, bringing us even closer to the station. We're still several kilometers behind, anywhere from 20 to 80 kilometers, but then you move up and you're just 2.5 kilometers beneath the station. And again, you're co-elliptic. After that, and so we did that final co-elliptic burn that was done a little bit earlier this morning and put us on that steady path about 2.5 kilometers below station. Now, right now we're coming up on what's known as approach initiation, coming up in just about 3.5 minutes. This is going to be a fairly long burn, again using those thrusters on the forward bulkhead and then the ones around the service section to fine-tune the attitude as we get up to begin our final approach. And before we got to this burn, the teams have gone through a number of steps just to ensure everything operating as we expect on board Dragon, on board station. We do a number of different setups on board the space station to get ready for Dragon's arrival and docking, doing things like feathering the solar arrays, essentially adjusting which way they're pointing just to minimize any thruster plumes from Dragon as it gets into its final approach, as those can degrade some of the solar cells. So we just want to basically put them in an angle where they're protected during that final approach. We're also handing over the attitude control of the station. Normally we're using the large gyroscopes on the U.S. side for visiting vehicle operations, including Dragon dockings. We hand over control to thrusters over on the Russian segment, just giving us propulsive control as we can fine-tune and maintain a really steady attitude on station during this approach. So that approach initiation burn, which is coming up in just a little over 2 minutes, the go-no-goes have gone through the teams, both here in Houston on behalf of the entire International Space Station partnership, And that go, no go also works in the flight control team out at Hawthorne. And so after we get through approach initiation, we're going to swing directly beneath the International Space Station. We'll get some additional camera views coming up, but our extremely talented Kronos flight controller here in Houston has had views of Dragon throughout. And in fact, we're getting a pretty spectacular one. We should be able to bring it up soon of Dragon just as we're entering in to an orbital sunset. So we're going to do this approach initiation burn, and there you go. Our first look at Dragon, and it will come back. So we're about to do this approach initiation burn coming up in about 1 minute, 20 seconds, and this is going to swing us up directly beneath the International Space Station. We're going to be about 400 meters right below it. And this will bring us to what's known as waypoint
Dragon
0.
to ground. We are in 4.010, and we have successfully completed 5.1 under comm checks.
Dragon SpaceX, copy all. Moving into section 6.
Moving into section 6.
Getting our first views inside the capsule.
And for awareness, approach initiation burn in just under 30 seconds.
Copy that, Chick.
And so we're just 15 seconds away from this approach initiation burn. As you can see, the AX-1 crew suited up and in their seats. You're hearing the Commander Mike L.A. speak with the Corps down in Hawthorne, the crew operations and resources engineer, essentially the Capcom over there on the West Coast. And we have confirmation the AI burn, the approach initiation burn has begun. And so right now with that approach burn started, we're a little over 7.5 kilometers away from the station still, but we're going to start closing in even quicker now, and this is going to bring us up and underneath, essentially on a center line from the station pointed down to planet Earth, and we're going to be just about 400 meters below. With this approach initiation burn, we're also going to move Dragon inside of what's known as the approach ellipsoid, and that's an imaginary shape around the station. It's a three-dimensional oval about 4 kilometers wide, 2 kilometers tall, 2 kilometers thick, and just governs a lot of the visiting vehicle traffic around station. And so before any vehicles are allowed to move inside that approach ellipsoid, you obviously have to get the go from the station team prior to being in that approach ellipsoid, which you can see kind of the imaginary shapes drawn around the station here in the top left corner. The approach ellipsoid's that larger one. We're going to move inside that. Before we move inside that, vehicles are on what's known as a 24-hour free safe trajectory, essentially meaning if we were to lose complete control.
4.010 is complete, and we feel great.
Copy all, Larry. Great to hear.
All right, so good words there from our core up to the crew. The approach initiation burn was nominal, so burn went as it expected. And Dragon now on the right course
SpaceX
to get in
on
closer
Dragon
to the
ground.
space station.
At this time, we are go for suit leak checks in procedure 4.011.
So copy all. We're good to go in 4.011 suit leak checks.
And so at this point, the crew's going to step into suit leak checks. As you could see, they still have their visors open while they're suited up and in their seats. The standard configuration is they'll have the suits themselves not fully sealed, so visors up. They'll typically leave one of the zippers on the suit open as well. And while they're in that suit, it has a connection directly to the seat. There's a number of umbilicals, essentially connection points for the suit to plug into the seat. And that's able to provide them with a number of different things depending on the port, but all of them can provide access to pressurized nitrox, nitrogen, and oxygen. And that can be flown or flowed into the suits once they're fully sealed, zipped up, and visors down to pressurize the suit, as these suits are really the main line of defense if we were ever in a situation like a cabin depress, a loss of pressurization inside the capsule. The suits can pressurize with that nitrox, provide a pressurized environment for the crew, and also all the necessary breathing gas. When they're not fully sealed up and flowing out, they're just flowing conditioned cabin air, so literally just taking the air from the Dragon cabin, cooling it down and flowing it through the suit just to keep them in a comfortable temperature. The umbilical also provides communications, so they have essentially a communications headset in that helmet, and then they're able to plug into the seat and then use a communication button on the armrest for that direct talking either to the ground or at this point with the space station. We have what's known as a bi-directional link at this point, and this is stuff that's been set up a little while before we came on the air.
We are ready to pressurize.
Dragon SpaceX, go for suit pressurization.
We're go for suit pressurization.
All right, so the AX-1 crew stepping through some suit leak checks now. So again, what they're going to do is they have the visors closed, the suits fully zipped, and they're going to pressurize them using that nitrox and then just run a leak check, ensure that you just have a stable pressure inside the suit. And we'll do these, and if you've been following since pre-launch, we've done these several times already. They'll do them on the ground as they're getting suited up. We did them once they were in Dragon on the launch pad, and we're going to do them again now. And then we'll do them several times at the end of the flight. Just essentially, before you get into the really dynamic phases of an operation, just do one additional check on the suits to make sure that they have good seals, good airflow, everything ready to go in case they are required. Leak checks are gonna be kind of a theme throughout the rest of today's operation. We'll be doing a lot of hatch leak checks following that docking to the space station before we get the hatches open. So you're gonna hear those a couple of times. But the crew stepping through those leak checks now. We are continuing to close in on the station at this point. We're just past about the 6 kilometer, just under 6,000 meters away now from the station and closing in. They're moving relative to the station at a rate of about 4.5 meters per second. Now, obviously, both the Dragon and the station are maintaining an orbital velocity. They're traveling in excess of 17,000 miles an hour relative to planet Earth, but the closing rate between them is fairly slow, just about 4.5 meters per second. And that's going to continue to drop down as we get to really the final phases, as we're stepping through those different waypoints and doing that final approach, slowing down usually to well under a meter per second during final approach. But for now, everything continuing to go smoothly. We're getting some views. We are in nighttime right now, which is why you're just able to see the navigational lights on board Dragon. And we should be getting a sunrise in about 25 minutes, and then we'll have daylight for a little over just about an hour. So we should end up having docking at nighttime, unfortunately, but by that point we'll be close enough, and the lights on Dragon and on station should give us some views of the capsule during final approach. So we're just about 38 minutes away from our arrival at that first waypoint. We're going to step through 3 different waypoints during this final approach to the station. The first one's going to be waypoint 0, and it's located just 400 meters directly below the space station, so we'll be inside that approach ellipsoid, but still outside what's known as the keep out sphere. That's just the final
SpaceX Endeavour,
checkpoint,
4
the final
good suit
gate.
leak checks.
Copy all, Larry. We see the same. 4 good leak checks. Next up, mid-course maneuver in just over 18 minutes.
Copy that, Jake. Thanks.
All right, so 4 good suit leak checks reported down to the core. So at this point, they'll be able to open visors back up and no longer running that pressurized nitrox into the suits, just cycling conditioned cabin air through just to maintain a nice, comfortable temperature as they go through the final stages of the approach. You heard we're about 18 minutes away from what's known as the mid-course burn. This is just a correction burn that's done on that approach to waypoint 0. All of this flight is done autonomously. Dragon has 3 redundant flight computers that are constantly calculating its positioning relative to the station, using a couple of different navigational assets, and it's constantly adjusting its approach, its timing for these burns, how long these burns last, just constantly recalculating. And it's been doing this since it got on orbit. That's why we'll typically get a rough timeline of when we expect these events to happen, but they just adjust in real time by seconds, by minutes, just depending on where the vehicle is. During this approach to station, Dragon's able to use a number of different navigational assets on board the spacecraft. One of the big milestones we got through a little bit earlier, a little over an hour ago, was known as Rendezvous Complete, which just essentially means our far field, our far away rendezvous is finished, and we're getting into what's known as proximity operations as we start to use the different systems on board Dragon to actively track relative to the station. And it's able to use GPS sensors, their processors and receivers on board the station that are able to communicate with the GPS on board Dragon, as it has several redundant sensors around the outside. Using that relative GPS, Dragon also has what's known as the Dragon Eye that's going to get used during the final stages of the approach and the flight in. Again, all this done autonomously, but that Dragon Eye using a laser rangefinder just to essentially bounce lasers off retro reflectors on board the station to give itself updated timings or updated distances, closing rates, things like that during that approach. Dragon also has star trackers, and they are what they sound like, using specialized cameras to map its relative position based on the stars it picks up in the night sky. Also using some inertial measurement units, which use accelerometers and gyroscopes to essentially do inertial mapping of Dragon's position. And so all of these are working in concert for it to constantly calculate its attitude, its relative position to the space station, where it needs to be for docking, when it needs to do these burns, and just constantly updating itself in real time. So right now, though, we are just under 15 minutes away from that mid-course burn, and then that's going to fine-tune our approach to what's known as waypoint 0, which we're about 34.5 minutes until we hit that. There's going to be 3 waypoints on the final approach to station, and we can either stop and hold at these waypoints, or if the teams give the go beforehand, they can just proceed through the waypoint on to the next one. And so waypoint 0 is going to put us just 400 meters directly below the station. And so on board Expedition 67 astronaut Rajachari, who's in the station's cupola right now monitoring, he's going to be able to essentially look straight down at the Crew Dragon Endeavour. After we pause at waypoint 0, since we're going to the zenith or the space-facing port today, Dragon's going to execute a maneuver to essentially fly 180 degrees around station. It's going to fly all the way to essentially the top part of station, just above it, between it and vastness of outer space, and it's going to pause at what's known as waypoint 1. And when we're at waypoint 1, we're about 220 meters away from station, so we're still outside that second imaginary checkpoint known as the keep out sphere, which is a sphere around the station with a 200-meter radius. And then, same as waypoint 0, we do a go, no-go right before we get to waypoint 1. And if the teams are go to proceed, we can essentially hit waypoint 1 and then continue right through. And that will bring us inside the keep out sphere. And this graphic will show you what our approach is going to be like. Because again, we're going to the top side, the top port on station. We call it the zenith facing, or the space facing port over on node 2. So we're going to get through waypoint 0, swing up to waypoint 1, and pause just outside the keep out sphere. And then once the teams get the go, they'll continue in. And we will stop again at what's known as waypoint 2. And that's just 20 meters away from that docking port. And so that one we will typically hold at just to do final checks, final adjustments. Again, at this point, the station will be under thruster attitude control. And then Dragon, once it gets the go, will proceed in from waypoint 2, again, flying autonomously for that slow approach until we hit contact and capture. And it's going to be docking to one of the 2 international docking adapters we have on board the station. One of them currently occupied by another Dragon, Crew Dragon Endurance, which carried the Crew 3 astronauts to the station last fall. But we're going to be going to the top one, International Docking Adapter number 3, on the top port of the Harmony module. Now, after they make that initial contact and capture, a couple of different steps have to happen before we get to what we call docking complete. So the docking mechanism will start to draw Dragon in to essentially start the hard mate process, and then a series of hooks around the outside of Dragon will drive, and that's what hooks and latches, and that's what gives us essentially a tight seal, a hard dock to the station. And then there's a number of other steps that take place. One of them, the extension of 2 umbilicals that will connect Dragon's power and data hard line to the station, so it'll no longer need its solar arrays while it's docked to charge systems on board. It's just able to be fed power through the station. Also, giving it that hardline connection for data and communications through station. We have essentially a wireless connection right now through something known as C2V2. It's the Common Communications for Visiting Vehicles. And this is what we use with visiting spacecraft to essentially enable spacecraft to spacecraft communication. So you might hear reference to the big loop by the different either the flight control teams or the astronauts on board Dragon and station right now. And that is just tying in all of our different communication loops. We operate on what's known as Dragon to grounds for talking directly to Dragon, and then space to grounds for talking directly to space station. And then when we take the big loop, we tie them all together into one. And so that way, anytime somebody's speaking either on Dragon or on station or on the ground, they're all able to hear each other and talk to each other at the same time. So you have this constant two-way communication between all the different groups involved in these integrated operations. And so we use that C2V2, that Common Communications for Visiting Vehicle link, to establish that not only gives us the audio communications, but it also enables Dragon commanding through the station, both for operators here on the ground, like the team out at SpaceX Hawthorne, or also the crew on board station. As said a couple of times, all of this flight is done autonomously, but we have the ability to manually override, to manually take control, to manually issue abort commands from several locations, primarily SpaceX Mission Control on Hawthorne, or the crew monitoring on board the space station, which today is Rasha Chari of the Expedition 67 crew, the NASA astronaut. And so he's able to essentially monitor data from Dragon, but can also send commands to it if required. We also use C2V2 for that relative GPS navigation that I was talking about. We have GPS sensors and receivers on Dragon, and then a GPS system on board station, and those two passing data back and forth to help with Dragon's relative navigation, just its navigation during these burns and its approach to the space station. So that was one of the major checkpoints that started integrated operations, was getting that command link set up, and that was done successfully a little over an hour ago. And so we've already been hearing communications on the big loop, and we know that the crew has been able to verify their command paths, and we're just continuing to follow along now with this approach. We're about 8 minutes away from that mid-course burn, and that will just fine-tune our approach up to waypoint 0. The teams here will do a go, no-go for approach, or basically flight through that waypoint about 10 minutes before we're scheduled to arrive. And you're continuing to get a view of Dragon, so you can see the red and the green navigational lights, and then the flashing one, which is coming right down the center line of the docking port. Dragon's continuing to close in. We're just about 2.8 kilometers away, right now closing at a rate of about 3.2 meters per second, and it's going to continue until we hit just 400 meters in distance from the station. Again, we're going to be right underneath as we reach waypoint 0. We're going to be inside the approach ellipsoid in about 14 minutes from now, and then swinging up to waypoint 0, just 400 meters below the station, before we either pause there for a moment or continue right on and do that big swing, that about 180-degree flight up around into the top part of station, and that'll put us onto waypoint 1, which is on what's known as the docking axis, essentially meaning you're lined up directly with the port that you're going to be docking with. And for us today, that is the Zenith, the space-facing port on node 2. And then if you're just joining, you're still getting a live look at Dragon. We're just about 6 minutes away from the mid-course burn, and we are just under an hour and a half from our expected docking time. We are expected to dock at about 6:45 a.m. Here in Houston, 4:45 in the West Coast. That's 11:45 GMT. All told, it's going to be about a 20-and-a-half-hour journey from launch to docking. We're 19 hours and 1.5 minutes into the flight so far. So just the final phases of approach coming up soon. But once they dock, the AX-1 crew members are going to be joining the Expedition 67 crew in progress on board the station. We've got 7 individuals living on board the station right now. Among them, you have the crew that arrived on a separate Crew Dragon Endurance, on NASA's SpaceX Crew 3 mission. And they are led on board the station right now by NASA astronaut Tom Marshburn. Here's a fun quick shot of them in their crew quarters. Tom Marshburn's up on the top there and is the current Expedition 67 commander. Down on the bottom was the Crew 3 commander Rajachari, and then again Marshburn's going to be prime for a lot of the hatch operations. Chari, seen here, is inside the cupola right now, and he's doing the monitoring of the Dragon's approach, and he's been following along as it's gone through its approach initiation. Also on board of Crew 3 was the NASA astronaut Kayla Barron, making her first flight into space along with Chari. And she's going to be helping with some of the hatch ops, so we'll probably see her floating in and out of view as we get past docking. And then also on the Crew 3 mission from the European Space Agency was ESA astronaut Matthias Maurer, also making his first flight into space. And so that rounds out the Crew 3 crew that's on board. Just a few weeks ago, though, they were joined by a Soyuz vehicle, which carried 3 Russian cosmonauts, led by the Soyuz commander Oleg Artemiev there in the center. Making a return to the space station, he was joined by Denis Matiev and Sergei Korsakov. So we're going to see all 7 of those crew members when we get to our welcome ceremony later this morning, as they get ready to welcome the AX-1 crew on board. And we expect that to take about 2 hours after docking until we get there. So after we dock to the space station, a couple of things will happen in parallel. On board the Dragon, the AX-1 crew will be able to get out of their seats, get out of their suits, and begin to configure the Dragon cabin for docked operations. There's a couple of steps they need to go through. One of the first things they do once we get the hatches open is to remove what's known as a LiO canister. It's lithium hydroxide. That's the system Dragon uses to scrub carbon dioxide from the vehicle during free flight. As after we get docked, not only power and data get integrated into the station, but the atmosphere gets integrated into station, and they'll be running what's known as an IMV, an intermodule ventilation duct, and that just helps provide positive flow to mix the atmosphere on board Dragon with the rest of the space station. So that's just a couple of the steps that we'll take after we get docked. While the crew on Dragon is getting out of their suits, the crew on station essentially starts stepping into steps to get the hatches open. NASA astronaut Tom Marshburn is going to be the primary one going through what's known as hatch and vestibule pressurization. We open a small valve on the hatch on the station side to flow atmosphere from station into that small space between the Dragon hatch and the station hatch. And we are going to stick with you all the way through docking, through hatch opening, until we get to that welcome. So we're just a little over a minute coming up to this mid-course burn. I'm going to stop talking for a moment. I want to toss it over to Trisha and Andy for a quick check-in at Hawthorne, as we're getting good views of Dragon, and we're going to get better ones coming up real soon.
Thank you, Dan. A lot to unpack here, Trisha. As Dan mentioned, this is a live view if you are just joining us of the Axiom 1 mission. So Dragon is about 2 kilometers away from the International Space Station, making its way to waypoint 0, which is going to be 400 meters away. And then there are more milestones that it'll need to go through before it docks in about an hour. So, we are watching Dragon, but things will definitely begin to pick up pace here as we get closer and closer to the International Space Station.
Absolutely. What an exciting time for the 4-person Axiom crew who are on their way to the ISS right now. For 3 of them, it's their first time experiencing something like this. All 4 crew members have certainly been very busy leading up to the launch and up to this moment with, hours and hours, I believe 700 to 1,000 hours of training that they had to go through in order to, be prepared for this type of experience, for working on the ISS, and for achieving the objectives that they're going to be doing over the next 8 days.
Yeah, and if you have been following this mission since launch yesterday morning, we did have an on-orbit live event about 3 hours ago, and to quote Larry Connor, he had said that he tried eating a muffin and things did not go as planned. So despite the 700 to 1,000 hours of training, I think getting used to living and operating in a microgravity environment can be tricky, but the team has a ton of science ahead of them in the next 10 days or 9 days now. So right now, they're getting acclimated. They woke up about 4 hours ago, and so we saw shots inside of Dragon. They have their suits on. We heard that we had 4 good leak checks. And so they're seated, they're strapped in, and in about an hour, they're going to be docking and, hopefully seeing the rest of the crew shortly.
Absolutely. And, they, like you mentioned, they have a jam-packed schedule for the next 8 to 9 days that they're going to be on orbit. The 4-person crew are going to be responsible for just about 25 experiments and over 100 hours of crew time dedicated to research, as well as outreach activities that, they'll be addressing several science, technology, and art-based outreach events. So, they have a busy schedule coming up ahead. And, as you mentioned on the On Orbit Live event, we saw a little bit about how they were acclimating to the zero-G life. The 3 who have never flown before, they're still getting the hang of how to orient themselves in a microgravity environment. And it's certainly harder than it looks. I was able to actually personally, a few weeks ago, be a part of a zero-G flight along with several of my colleagues from Axiom Space, where we were testing out some hardware for the station, and it was pretty difficult not to just go flying down the cabin of the airplane when we were in those microgravity moments. So, pretty tough.
Yeah, it really just is a testament to all of the training that the crew had to go through to be ready for this mission. But as Dan was setting up, we were anticipating the mid-course burn, which is essentially a minor correction burn if Dragon needs to sort of make minor adjustments to align itself and ensure that it's on the right course to waypoint 0. That burn has completed, and it completed successfully, no issues. So with that, we're going to send it back over to Dan at JSC in Houston.
Hey, thanks, Andy and Trisha. So yeah, as Andy just said, we had a good mid-course maneuver. We heard that they have converged on waypoint 0, which is going to be our stop point. And this appears to be a view from Dragon closing in on the space station. They're just a little over a kilometer away and continuing to close in. They've slowed down to just about 1.7 meters per second, but we should be coming up on waypoint 0, moving them just 400 meters below the station in about 16 minutes. And we're getting a look over the shoulders of the commander and pilot seats, and in that center screen you're able to see their expected flight path. So you can see it swinging up. The station is at the top of that screen in the crosshair, and they're going to stop just 400 meters directly below, and then they're going to execute a maneuver to fly up and over top the station, getting onto their docking axis, looking at the space-facing port on Harmony before they begin the final approach. And now we'll go side by side, and we should be getting a sunrise in about a minute or so, so we'll see things start to light up. You can already see the station itself starting to enter into an orbital dawn, as both of these spacecraft right now are flying just over the southern part of the Pacific Ocean, about to begin a pass over South America. So with that successful mid-course burn, we're essentially done with all the major burns during this approach. We're just going to be now using some of the Draco thrusters for these translational moves through the different waypoints. We've got 3 waypoints. We're going to go through waypoint 0, waypoint 1, and waypoint 2. 0 just 400 meters below the station. Waypoint 1, 220 meters directly above the docking port on the space-facing side. And then waypoint 2 just 20 meters away from docking. So they're going to continue to close in. We're essentially using all of the service section Draco thrusters at this point. And so that was the Capcom here in Houston. Capcom here in Houston, Scott Zagady, giving the call up to the crew, again, using what's called the big loop. So that's just all of our different communication loops, space to grounds to station, and Dragon to grounds to Dragon, all tied together, allowing the team here in Houston, the team in Hawthorne, and the crew members on board Station and Dragon all to talk with each other. And Scott was radioing up essentially the procedure that NASA astronaut Rajachari, who's doing the approach monitoring, is able to jump into. And he is standing by in the station's cupola, and he is able to monitor getting real-time data fed through that bidirectional link from Dragon to the space station. He's also able to send commands to the vehicle. So in addition to having that human oversight inside Dragon and on the ground in Hawthorne, you've got the station crew in the loop as well. But everything has proceeded very smoothly so far today with the automated rendezvous. And you heard we're less than a kilometer away, so Dragon at this point inside the approach ellipsoid. It's going to continue to approach. We got about 450 meters to go. We should get to waypoint 0 in just a hair under 13 minutes from now. And at this point, the teams are going to start doing their go, no goes for each of the different waypoints. So again, we can get to these waypoints and we can pause if we need to either stop and make sure that the relative navigation is functioning, if we run into any issues with thrusters, any issues on station, or if everything continues to be green, we just continue right past these waypoints and we'll go from 0 to waypoint 1 pretty quickly. And so just about 12 minutes away from that next stop, we might occasionally see some thruster firings on board Dragon when we get the views from the space station. At this point, we're using what's known as and that was Rajachari radioing down that the attitude of Dragon is as we expected. Again, Dragon controlling its attitude with a number of different sensors. One of the primary ones, just an inertial measurement unit, which uses accelerometers and gyroscopes to understand Dragon's relative position. Also using, for this final approach,
Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground, comm check.
SpaceX Endeavor on Dragon to ground, loud and clear.
Hey Larry, on Dragon to ground, wanted to let you know that we're not getting any response on the big loop.
Jake, understood, and we'll investigate at our end. SpaceX Endeavor, Dragon to ground, out here.
Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground. We had you 3x3 there.
Okay, I rogered your call a little while ago. Another comm check, both on the big loop. I guess you didn't hear me.
Okay, copy all. We've got you on Dragon to ground. Recommend another comm check on the big loop.
All right, copy. That didn't work. SpaceX Endeavor on Dragon. Sorry, I'm a big out here.
Hey, Mike, we had you 3x3 there. Not sure if you did anything differently, but that seemed to work.
I don't think I did, but I'm glad it's working now.
Okay, so a couple of quick updates. The crew was given the go to proceed through waypoint 0, on through waypoint 1, and all the way through waypoint 2. So we're going to see Dragon step through these different waypoints pretty quickly. So we're just under 200 meters away from waypoint 0, and we're approaching station from below. That's why you're seeing the Earth's surface start to come into view as we're heading into that orbital sunrise. Dragon right now about 570 meters in closing. We're about 8 minutes away, a little less than 8 minutes at this point until we hit waypoint 0. It's going to autonomously proceed through waypoint 0, and it's going to execute kind of a mini fly around maneuver, so swinging about 180 degrees from the bottom of station all the way up top, and that's going to put it onto the docking axis lined up with that docking adapter on the space-facing side of the Node 2 module. And that'll put us at waypoint 1, which is just 220 meters away from station, and then they'll proceed immediately from there down to waypoint 2, getting just 20 meters away from the docking port before we pause, and then do that final go-no-go for approach. Once we get into that final approach, Dragon will slowly fly in, again just using those service section Dracos, until it's just a few meters away, and then we'll hear a call out for what's known as CHOP. That's crew hands-off point. That's essentially just giving the crew a heads up not to initiate any manual aborts or try any manual control, because at that point, that close in, everything has to be done automated by the computer itself on board Dragon. So you'll hear CHOP call out just a couple of seconds before we get contact and capture. We were slated to dock just a little over an hour from now, an hour and 7 minutes. But as we continue to move through the burns, we'll adjust that in real time. So we are just 5 minutes, 45 seconds away from waypoint 0. And we're about to see South America passing beneath the Dragon spacecraft as it's just about to pass over Chile. We're fully into that orbital sunrise at this point. We're going to have good lighting for at least another 50 minutes until we enter into an orbital nighttime. And we're just 5 minutes away from waypoint 0, continuing to close in, just about 475 meters away from station. Again, during all of these maneuvers, we're using those Draco thrusters on board Dragon. We've got 16 of them around the vehicle. There's 4 in the forward bulkhead, which is what's looking directly at our camera right now. And as we get in closer, you'll be able to see those. They've got some larger expansion nozzles on them, and they're used for really the big pushing burns that Dragon executed over the last 19 hours to catch up to the space station. As they're now pointing directly at station, you can probably guess we're not using those for these maneuvers at this point. We're using instead the ones around Dragon's service section. So that's just around the bottom part of the capsule, still on the capsule, not on the trunk, which occupies the space typically called the service module on other spacecraft. All of these thrusters are built directly into the Dragon spacecraft itself. They're essentially around the same area that the really large Super Dracos are. Those are only used for abort scenarios on either on the pad or during ascent, and then as soon as we get on orbit, those get disabled for the remainder of the mission. So those are not going to be used for anything today or anything for the rest of the Crew Dragon Endeavor's flight. But we are using the service section Draco thrusters. Each one of these provides about 90 pounds force of thrust, so used for these only maneuvers in space in vacuum, but also attitude control during the final phases of re-entry. They're in clusters of 3, so we got 4 clusters of 3 of these thrusters around the base of the capsule, and these are going to be used for attitude control, so just which way the vehicle's pointing, but then also for those translational moves. So we're going to be doing one of those in a little over 3 minutes after we get to waypoint 0. And we're going to see Dragon start to fly first out in front of the station, and then eventually swinging just up over top until we get to waypoint 2. We're just 430 meters away. So again, we're just about 3 minutes away from waypoint 0. And again, Dragon has a couple of tools available to it for this approach, for its navigation. When we establish that bidirectional communication, we're able to establish what's known as relative GPS. So you have basically a GPS system on Dragon talking to a GPS system on board the station, trading their relative state data, as that provides the Dragon flight computer data to fine-tune its maneuver. As we're getting in close now, we're going to start using some of the navigational elements on the very forward part of the Dragon spacecraft. These are covered up by the nose cone during ascent, and then one of the first things we do when we get the nose cone open is you reveal these sensors that are going to be used for the approach and docking. You've got the Dragon Eye, which is uses what's commonly known as a LiDAR system, basically using lasers that bounce off of reflective points on station to give distance data, range rate data, how quickly you're closing in. We're also able to use a thermal and an infrared camera. There is just a visible light camera on the very forward part of Dragon that will typically get some views. We got some views of the station from that earlier. That's not part of the actual navigation at all. That's just used for situational awareness. It can also be used should the crew have to take over manual control. That'll be one of the things feeding data into their manual control piloting software that's built into those displays, that anytime we get a look over the commander and the pilot's shoulder inside the capsule, you'll be able to see those displays, and they'll just have those up to monitor the approach, but then they can also use that should they need to take control and fly Dragon manually for any reason. So we are just about 30 seconds away from waypoint 0, just 411 meters away from station. So just a small bit to go, and then we'll be passing through our first waypoint. Again, we're going to hit 3 of these on the way to docking today. We're going to start with waypoint 0, swinging up to waypoint 1, just 220 meters away, and then eventually into waypoint 2, just 20 meters from the docking port. Meanwhile, preparations on the station continue. We've done a couple that I talked about earlier just to get ready for this approach. We do something called feathering the solar arrays. That's just essentially pointing them in a direction to minimize their surface area that's pointing towards Dragon. As Dragon does these thruster firings, you're essentially expelling some gases, some prop out into the vacuum of space, and that can leave residues on any sensitive surfaces. And so we just orient the solar arrays to basically show as little surface area as possible in the direction of these thruster firings, and just to minimize any residues getting on the solar cells. And this is standard for any visiting vehicle operation, and that's just one of the first steps that you take as you get into these final approaches. We've also transitioned the station's MCS motion control system.
Zone 2, Dragon attitude is as expected.
That was NASA astronaut Rajachari radioing Dragon attitude as expected. So we've now just passed waypoint 0. We're inside 400 meters away from the space station. And at this point, we're going to see Dragon start to do a maneuver, taking it up out in front of the station and then up over top, heading up to waypoint 1. So it's going to essentially do a 180-degree swing around the station, going from directly beneath to directly above. That's going to line it
Dragon,
up with
SpaceX on the
that
big
docking
loop.
adapter.
Approach 0 in progress. Trajectory has converged on waypoint 1. Expect waypoint 1 arrival at approximately 1121 UTC.
And then that call we just heard from Core. So the trajectory has aligned on waypoint 1, and that's where we're headed next. That's that point right above the station. And we expect to be there in about 34 minutes from now. All the times you're hearing called up are in UTC or GMT, just that Greenwich Mean Time, that Universal Standard Time. And that's what all of the different operators working space station ops will go off of, as you have control centers in just about every time zone imaginable. And so we use that UTC just to tie everybody's planning and tracking together. So we're about 34 minutes from waypoint 1
on Dragon to ground.
Hey Dragon, we've got you on Dragon to ground.
Jake, did you get Mike's transmissions both on the big band Dragon to ground?
Larry, that's a negative on both. Did not receive either transmission. I wonder if it's a Vox setting or past that I'll keep thinking. Not sure.
Thanks, we'll investigate on our end.
And so we've heard them continue their troubleshooting a couple of different issues with the big loop, but we're still continuing to get that comm and not any impedance towards continuing with our docking so far today.
Dragon, SpaceX, we got the last half of that call.
SpaceX Endeavor on Dragon to ground. Yeah, Jake, I'm not sure what to do here. I don't think it's a Vox setting because I'm definitely pressing to press to talk. I'm seeing the transmit light up when I'm talking the whole time, so I'm not sure what to do. Worst comes to worst, we rely on Larry to make the calls.
Okay, copy all, MLA. I had you 3x3 on that call. Understand you don't think it's a Vox issue. Would encourage troubleshooting, and I'm sure you are. We'll stand by for another big loop comm check.
Roger that.
All right, we're continuing to check off milestones during this approach. We're already past waypoint 0, on our way towards waypoint 1. Dragon continuing to fly as they
MLA,
continue to do a number of
SpaceX
communication
on the
checks
big
with
loop.
the ground.
We caught the second half of that call. Recommend pressing push to talk and waiting a few seconds before starting a call.
SpaceX Endeavor, copy. How do you hear this transmission?
Dragon, we caught that entire transmission.
Check Endeavor, copy. That'll be my new technique.
All right, but right now, Dragon making its swing from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1. We're just about 30 minutes away until Dragon's directly above the station and lined up on the docking axis with that international docking adapter. Let's check back in with the Hawthorne team, though. Andy, Trish, how's everything going over there in California?
Things are going good here, Dan. As we continue to watch Dragon, things are beginning to pick up pace as Dragon makes its way towards waypoint 1. For everyone tuning in, we are hearing dialogue between Larry Connor, the pilot who is currently in Dragon Endeavor, and the CORE, which stands for Crew Operations Resource Engineer here in Hawthorne. They are troubleshooting some communications, we'll likely continue to get updates there, but you also notice that there are some beeping before the communications happen. Those are called Quindar tones, and those are really just used to clear the air to make sure that the communication is as clear as possible from ground to Dragon. But as part of the Axiom 1 mission, this is SpaceX's 6th human spaceflight mission overall, and the 5th to the orbiting lab. Dragon has a long history of really being designed from the beginning with human spaceflight in mind. There is the first Dragon capsule that is hanging behind myself and Trisha here in Hawthorne. And even on the days of its inception, there was a window in place, and we weren't sending people up into space at that time, but we knew that sometime in the future we wanted to. So it's super exciting that I can't believe I'm saying it, but this is the 6th time that we're sending people up on Dragon.
Yeah, that's certainly amazing. And if I understand correctly, that first Dragon capsule was sent up with cheese?
Yeah, the cheese was used as a mass simulator for that capsule, and we've definitely come a long way since then. But even between that capsule and what we're seeing here today, there has been numerous upgrades to the Dragon capsule. First and foremost, with every flight where we're taking crew, when they return, we collect all of the feedback to make sure that the next iteration of crew flight is as comfortable and a well-versed experience as possible for the incoming crew. So things like adding USB chargers, reorganizing where to store and pack things, those are all feedback that we take into reiteration of Dragon's design. The Dragon capsule itself also has gone through a number of upgrades. If you've been following the Dragon program, you'll notice that we no longer have the solar arrays, which would unfurl after Dragon separated from the second stage. The solar panels are actually built onto the trunk section itself. And so, as Dragon gets closer, we'll likely see half of the trunk section colored black, and those are the solar panels that will collect energy and really power Dragon throughout its stay up in space.
Absolutely, and you mentioned that you guys, that SpaceX has had this is the 6th flight that you've had in collaboration with NASA, sending up NASA astronauts to the ISS. This is Axiom's first, mission in collaboration with companies like SpaceX and as well as our government counterpart NASA. This first private astronaut mission is really setting the precedent and serving as a case study for what these partnerships and collaborations will look like in the future, for future private astronaut missions, and as well as the Axiom station overall.
Yeah, I think it marks a turning point in space travel. This is the first all-private mission, as you had mentioned, and with all the signs that each of the crew members are going to be performing, it's just a tremendous sort of milestone in the spacefaring world.
Absolutely, and in our view, it's really the next chapter of the spaceflight industry. During the launch broadcast, we heard from Pathy leaders about how this was really the vision of spaceflight from the very beginning of NASA's program. 60 years ago, they really envisioned this to be what it would evolve to, so that they could focus on, returning to the moon, going to Mars, and possibly even beyond in the future. So, this is the ISS and NASA they've been the pioneers in these kinds of relationships, all the logistics and training and everything it takes to put humans into space and low Earth orbit. And transitioning that to a commercialized partnership is going to mean that, private sectors, private industries are going to need a lot of time and NASA's expertise in learning how to establish and maintain these relationships effectively. It's really a learning process through all of these missions, to get there. That's a really gorgeous view of the curvature of the Earth.
Yeah, I think when we had started this broadcast, we had a phenomenal view of Dragon in the, I believe it was an orbital sunset, but it looked like a painting with all the colors and Dragon in the foreground. And, as Dragon approaches the International Space Station, we're going to continue to get
Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground for audio troubleshooting.
SpaceX Endeavour on Dragon to ground. Go ahead.
Hey, Larry. Quick update. We are still seeing good Suit 2 telemetry via the pressure transducer. We don't suspect an umbilical issue, but we're hoping to gain some confidence in this comm method as we head towards waypoint 1. Hoping MLA can give one more comm check on the big loop using the press, wait a second or two, and then talk method.
Yeah, copy all, and Michael giving another go on the big loop using the revised technique.
SpaceX Endeavour, comm check on the big loop.
Dragon SpaceX, I think we lost the S and P of SpaceX. Maybe another half second, but otherwise sounds good.
Okay, Jake, did you hear okay?
That's a 4x4 call, MLA, and good to hear.
Copy up.
So again, the teams are continuing to work through and troubleshoot some communications. Looks like things are heading in the right direction. That, again, was both MLA, the commander, and Larry, the pilot, talking to the core here at Hawthorne. We talk about joint operations and all of the teams it takes to really get vehicles to the International Space Station safely. At Mission Control Houston, there is a CAPCOM, which stands for Capsule Communicator. They're really responsible for ground communications to the folks already aboard the International Space Station. The flight director is adjacent to the CAPCOM, and they're really leading the team through major milestones. We also have ATCOs, which are attitude, determination, and control officers, and that person's job is to control the attitude or orientation of the International Space Station. So a lot of parties working together to make sure that the crew and the capsule and the folks at the International Space Station are safe as we continue this docking procedure.
Absolutely. And we also have in terms of Axiom, we also have our own, similar positions like that. Some of those positions include the Axiom Operations Lead. This is essentially the equivalent to the Flight Operations Director. They're in charge of leading the Axiom's flight control team. And for the PAM missions, they're in charge of performing and managing the communication with the Axiom crew. Another position that will be especially relevant when the crew gets on orbit and starts conducting their research experiments will be the Axiom Research Officer, whose responsibilities include planning and coordinating Axiom payloads with the crew while they're on orbit, as well as interfacing with the payloads owners, who are the research institutions that the crew and Axiom has partnered with to send up research into space.
So on the right-hand side, we have a view over the shoulders of the commander MLA and Larry, the pilot, in the nifty SpaceX spacesuits. These are these are used for IVAs or intra-vehicular activities, really meant and designed for use inside of Dragon. They are really a sort of space system in and of itself. They are a one-piece design, so everything from the helmet to the gloves to the boots, they're all attached. The helmet is 3D printed, and as Dan was mentioning earlier, there is an umbilical on the right thigh that hooks up to each of the seats for the crew members, and in that umbilical will house communications for the astronauts to communicate to ground, as well as lines for nitrox, which again is a combination of nitrogen and oxygen, same stuff that you would see in scuba tanks. In the case of a depressurization event, the suits would inflate, and you would get a nice flow of nitrox through to make sure that the astronauts are safe and have a habitable environment. But for now, you see that the visors are up, and every time that we don or put on the spacesuits, we always run a leak check to make sure that, again, in case of an event where we're losing pressure, the astronauts would be safe.
Beautiful shot there of the ISS on the right. So those suits, I mean, they look pretty cool, but they are, from what I understand, pretty comfortable for the crew. That nitrox line really serves to keep the crew comfortable and conditioned while they're wearing it, and it's pretty customized for each crew member.
Yeah, we do take a lot of measurements to make sure that the suit itself is form-fitted. The chairs that they're sitting in are also able to be customized. There are different size buckets, small, medium, large, and the length of the armrest is also customizable. So comfort is definitely something that we take into mind when we are suiting up the team members. So this mission really is a mission of firsts. The four-person multinational crew includes Michael López-Alegría, the first person to command a mission as both a government astronaut and a private astronaut. Larry Connor, the first private astronaut pilot in spaceflight history. Eytan Stibbe, the second Israeli astronaut and the first to live and work on the International Space Station. And Mark Pathy, who will become the 11th Canadian astronaut. It's also the first mission to the space station with all commercial providers, including the ride to space, the SpaceX Dragon launching on SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket.
Certainly a very significant event for all of them and for the countries they're representing, and really for the global audience. It also breaks new training ground. The AX-1 astronauts are the first all-private crew to complete NASA's training flow. As I mentioned earlier, each AX-1 crew member completed between 700 and 1,000 hours of training in safety, health, ISS systems, launch site operations, and additional training for research and technology demonstrations, and for their payloads to prepare for the mission. It's also a very serious science and research-focused effort. More than 25 research investigations are planned during the mission, including some pretty cool Axiom Space managed experiments like the Tesserae prototype, which is a self-assembling space habitat made out of robotic tiles, and the JAMS air purification demonstration, where they're looking into technology for things like air purification. All of these are very helpful and will definitely have implications for life on Earth. The crew members, the 3 crew members who are the first-time flyers, Larry, Mark, and Eytan, they also were able to curate their own research portfolios. They worked with several research institutions, hospitals, museums around the world to coordinate these experiments, and they'll also be able to host several science outreach and engagement activities while on orbit. Their research investigations range from biological studies, such as cells tied to help better understanding aging, to biomedical research on spine, cardiac, and brain health.
Yeah, so on the right-hand side, you can see that the astronauts and crew members are interacting with the LCD screens. Those will give the crew a ton of information about the vehicle, things like altitude, which engines are firing, and right here, we just saw it, but we saw some plumes and bursts of the Draco thrusters on Dragon. So that view that was just up on screen, that is the International Space Station looking at Dragon as it approaches and continues to make its way towards Waypoint. It is about 220 meters away from the International Space Station. So things continuing to look good there. This shot here is a view of Mission Control in Hawthorne. Before, when we had the dual pan up, we also had a view of Dragon looking at the International Space Station. So very, very cool views. Absolutely. Some of the other, really fantastic technology that the crew will be looking at on board, in particular, Mark Pathy will be testing a 3D two-way holoportation device. The self-assembling space habitat wasn't exciting enough. They'll be looking at this holoportation device, which is a mixed reality app using special lenses to project images via holograms. The innovation could be used to connect astronauts with loved ones on Earth on future long-duration space missions to combat feelings of isolation and loneliness. And, as NASA sets their sights on, returning to the moon, going to Mars, and, even beyond, those questions and behavioral wellness issues become, more and more relevant, in those situations. Yeah, it was super neat to read about all the science that's being done, specifically the Tesserae experiment, where you have these modules that can be packed and sent up to space nice and flat, and then in space they are self-assembling, which is sort of mind-blowing to think about. The crew is also partnering with the Trish Research Institute to study basically all the things that happen to your body when you're in a microgravity environment, and all that data is collected and returned back to Earth, and can be used for future science endeavors, which is super awesome that the crew is doing this. Absolutely, and I want to go back and touch on the that Tesserae experiment. You mentioned that you're able to pack it flat and then send it up into space, where it's then self-assembling essentially. That is a huge savings in terms of up mass, which directly translates to costs for missions like that. So usually when, for example, we send up a module. This becomes relevant for Axiom Station. You have to send the module structure assembled and then launch that up into space. But with technology like the self-assembling robotic tiles, the Tesserae experiment, you could potentially send that flat, save a lot of space and a lot of mass, and then have that assembled in orbit by itself, which saves also a lot of crew time when talking about outfitting modules in space. So just some super exciting experiments in manufacturing research that could also help to benefit us on Earth. I mean, I can think of a lot of ways that self-assembling tiles would benefit the manufacturing industry here every day. Yeah, it would be super cool to basically potentially buy a self-assembling home and just set it up.
It really would.
We don't have any shots of Dragon or the ISS right now, but I'm sure we'll get them back soon. As Dragon continues its way towards waypoint 1, which is it should reach in under 15 minutes here, and makes its way towards waypoint 2. This is also the point where its soft docking ring will start to deploy. The way that the Dragon works in terms of docking is there is a soft docking ring, and on that ring are 3 pedals. And as Dragon makes contact with the docking adapter on the International Space Station side, that those pedals and docking ring are what makes first contact. And so it'll sort of attach itself via those rings and pedals. And then there are 2 sets of 6 hooks that will drive into place, and that will be what we call hard capture. And so at that stage, that's when sort of docking is complete, but it's done in a couple of different stages.
Absolutely.
And, so sorry, we might hear the call out that that procedure has started. So Trisha and I will definitely be listening in for that.
Yeah, we certainly will be. In the meantime, though, it's noteworthy it's worth spending time on the fact that, the crew is representing 4 different countries, America, Spain, Israel, and Canada, for outreach in 5 different languages. So, a large component of their mission objectives are conducting excellent science. But in addition to that, they're also helping to inspire people on Earth to pursue science and engineering studies. The crew represents, as I mentioned earlier, 4 countries and will be completing outreach experiments and events in 5 languages, specifically Spanish, Hebrew, French, English, and Arabic, which just helps to contribute to expanding efforts to connecting with more people around the world.
The crew is able to bring up some, things as well. And Stibbe will be bring surviving pages of the diary written in space by the first Israeli astronaut, Ilan Ramon, who died February 1st, 2003, when Space Shuttle Columbia and crew perished during re-entry. He will also bring a painting created by Ramon's daughter and a song written by his son. So definitely a great nod to, the first Israeli astronaut.
Absolutely. And, in a similar vein, Larry Connor will be, he shares an Ohio heritage with actually the Orville and Wilbur Wright, who he will also be bringing along a small piece of cloth used by the Wright brothers on the first ever powered flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in 1903. So, a lot of history there and, being represented on the ISS. It's just the beginning, really, for Axiom Space. AX-1 is the first of several proposed Axiom missions to the orbiting laboratory, and it's an important step towards Axiom's goal of constructing a private space station, Axiom Station, in low Earth orbit. It'll serve as the global academic and commercial hub, and like I mentioned earlier, will really be the next chapter in opening up low Earth orbit to research institutions and even governments around the world.
So for now, we are under 10 minutes now for Dragon to reach waypoint 1, getting awesome views of Dragon. So the hatch is open, and there is a centerline camera at the center, basically, of Dragon. That is what Dragon is using to line itself up with the docking target on the International Space Station. But yeah, things are continuing to go smoothly. I'm going to send it back over to Dan at JSC for updates.
Hey, thanks, Andy and Trish. We are just 7 minutes away from arrival at waypoint 1. And so Dragon right now only just under 330 meters away from the station. It's continuing this spin from underneath station to directly above. We're going to line up on the docking axis at waypoint 1, just 220 meters away from International Docking Adapter number 3, which is on the space-facing port of the Harmony module. Harmony hosts both of the international docking adapters on the station right now, which is used for all U.S. commercial docking vehicles. So far, Dragon the only one to make use of it, both the cargo and the crew variants. And we've got another Crew Dragon docked to station that delivered our SpaceX Crew 3 astronauts. And pretty soon we're going to have a second one, Crew Dragon Endeavour. So in just about 6 minutes, we'll hit waypoint 1, and then we're going to continue on in from there. The team's already getting the go to continue into waypoint 2. And waypoint 2 will be just 20 meters away from the docking port on that space-facing side of Harmony. And then we'll pause at waypoint 2 before we begin that final approach. And so all of this, again, being done autonomously by the flight computers on board Dragon. We've got 3 redundant ones that are constantly calculating its position relative to the station. While we were still quite a bit further away, we were relying on GPS and star trackers to fine-tune Dragon's path towards the station. Ever since we got in closer, we've been using as the primary means the Dragon Eye system, which uses a combination of different navigational tools. One of the primary ones is a form of LiDAR laser range finding, where we're essentially bouncing lasers off of reflectors on the station, and then those sensors are able to tell how long it took for that laser to travel back, and that gives you a distance output immediately. And so it's using those to constantly ping with station. Dragon Eye also has an infrared camera set up that the crew can use should they need to take manual control. And we use infrared as it doesn't matter what the lighting conditions are, that camera is usable. So even if we're in a complete orbital nighttime, the crew could use that camera. And there's a shot with the half moon also in the distance behind Dragon, as it is almost directly above space station at this point. We're just 4 minutes away from waypoint number 1. And as Andy said, there's a couple of additional cameras on Dragon. There's 2 pointing directly out of that top hatch. There's a centerline camera and one that's just known as a media camera, just giving us additional views of space station from Dragon, not used at all in the actual guidance and navigation control, but just something that we get to use to bring you along for the ride. And also, importantly, just gives additional situational awareness for teams on just relative positioning of Dragon. But we've not had any issues so far with our approach. We're just about 3.5 minutes from waypoint 1. We don't have video from the space station right now. Unfortunately, we are going to have a couple of gaps just as we get into the really interesting phases as Dragon gets in close, but we'll get that video back pretty quickly. We have all of that signal coming down from station through those TDRS, the tracking data and relay satellites. Every once in a while, the antennas that point towards those satellites might get blocked by some piece of station structure, and that can cause the dropouts, or when we're just out of the range of the satellites themselves, we'll usually do what's known as a handover as we just transition between the different TDRS satellites. But we'll have a little bit of blockage during the final approach phases, but we should have good views of Dragon during that docking portion.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop. We're 2 minutes out from waypoint 1. Approach 1 and soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Dragon will continue approach to waypoint 2. As a reminder, manual impulsive retreat recovery is not permitted.
All right, just 2 minutes away from waypoint 1. All of this being done autonomously on Dragon. We've got
Dragon,
a couple of
SpaceX
additional
on Dragon
backstops
ground.
if needed.
For your awareness, we did not get a readback on the big loop if one was provided.
SpaceX Endeavour on Dragon to ground. We'll investigate and be back to you.
SpaceX Endeavour Dragon.
We're about 90 seconds
Jake,
away.
One provided a response, that is, and I waited probably 2, maybe 3 seconds after keying the mic to start speaking, so I'm not sure what else to do. Would you like to have Larry try a comp check on the big group?
Copy all, MLA. We had you 3x3 there on Dragon to ground. Good suggestion for Larry to try the big loop. We'll stand by.
SpaceX Endeavour on the big loop. How do you copy?
Dragon, SpaceX, we've got you 5x5 on the big loop with an echo. Make sure you're only, oh sorry, stand by, good to go.
SpaceX Endeavour Dragon to ground. I think we'll let Larry be the key transmitter on the big loop, and I'll switch to Dragon to ground.
Okay, MLA, on Dragon to ground, copy all, and understood.
All right, so at this moment, while they were conducting those kind of final comm checks, again, we've been troubleshooting a few issues with the spacecraft commander, Mike L.A., to be able to talk on the big loop. But
Dragon and station
pilot
SpaceX
Larry
on the big
Connor
loop.
not having
Expect
any issues.
reconfiguration of the C2V2 link shortly.
Copy all, Jake. C2V2 reconfiguration.
And so they're going to reconfigure
Station on two.
C2V2, that's the
Dragon is
common
at expected
communications
altitude.
for visiting vehicles.
Copy, thanks, Tom.
The station crew reporting Dragon in the attitude that they expect as they monitor Dragon during its final approach. Teams down here on the ground reporting that the docking ring is beginning to extend out, as that'll be used for the soft capture.
And we're ready for docking.
Copy that, Tom. Ready for docking.
And that was Station Commander Tom Marshburn reporting the station crew is ready for the approach and docking. Just as they continue to step through their procedures, you heard 5 and 6. 5 actually has them get a cue to radio down to the ground that they're ready. We'll also hear a chop call out come. That's that crew hands-off point as we get into the final stages of approach. But for right now, we are just under 9.5 minutes away from waypoint 2 arrival. And so waypoint 2 is just 20 meters outside of the space station. We'll hang out there probably for about a minute or so while the teams do their final go-no-go for docking. Flight Director TJ Creamer here in the space station flight control room leading the integrated teams. We've been in what's known as integrated operations for the last several hours. And that just speaks to the time when Dragon is close enough in towards the station, when the SpaceX and the space station flight control teams are kind of working hand in hand as they go through all of these different checkpoints, getting the go from the station side before Dragon proceeds. And so the docking ring on Dragon is beginning to extend. That's going to be used for that initial contact and capture. Andy gave a really great description. There's 3 pedals on the docking ring on Dragon that are basically going to guide it in for that first capture moment with a passive system on the station side in that international docking adapter. After that docking ring then gets retracted, that'll bring Dragon close enough in to enable a series of 12 hooks. And that'll give us a hard mate after that point We can continue with a couple of the other post-docking activities, like extending an umbilical that's going to integrate hardline communications data and power between Dragon and the space station. So in the meantime, we're just about 7.5 minutes away from arrival at waypoint 2. And per the timeline, just about 17 minutes and 45 seconds from our expected docking time, which was originally slated at about 6:45 a.m. Central Time, 11:45 GMT. So again, that time is just updating automatically onboard Dragon as it calculates its amount of time that it's going to spend at each of these waypoints, the duration of the burns and the approaches. But at this point, we're under 7 minutes away from waypoint 2. Dragon just about 144 meters away from the station. And as expected, we've slowed down quite a bit. So as we initially fly in, we were flying at about 3 or 4 meters per second. And that was just the relative velocity between the Dragon spacecraft and station. At this point, we're closer to a crawl. We're moving at about 0.3 of a meter per second as Dragon flies in. So it's just doing very fine-tuning maneuvers at this point using those service section Dracos. So no thrusters are firing right now. It's still coasting off of its forward momentum. We might see those thruster plumes fire depending on lighting conditions as we get just up to waypoint 2, where we're going to hold with Dragon just 20 meters away from the space station docking port. And there you can see some of those thruster firings now as the lighting conditions do change. Again, at this point, we're just using the service section Dracos. So they're around kind of the base of the capsule portion. There's 12 of them in total in 4 clusters of 3. And those are all being fired automatically. Dragon calculating its path in using the Dragon Eye at this point, bouncing lasers off the space station to see exactly how far away it is, what its range rate, how quickly it's flying in, and then adjusting in real time using those Dracos. All right, so we are under 5 minutes away from arrival at waypoint 2, so that'll be our final waypoint, and then we'll be ready for the final go, no-go for docking, just about 15 minutes away from the expected docking time. So let's check in over at Hawthorne with Andy and Trisha, getting exciting, getting Dragon in real close. We're in the final stages. How ready are you to see this Dragon dock to station?
Very ready. We continue to get awesome views of Dragon. We are about 1.5 minutes away from an orbital sunset. So Dan, I think you had already predicted, but lighting conditions might change a little bit. But for now, things are continuing to go super smoothly. If you look closely at the center of Dragon, Dan had talked a lot about the forward bulkhead thrusters. There are some holes that you can see on the bottom of that circular forward bulkhead. There's 2 more that aren't really well lit, but those are where...
Dragon and Station, SpaceX, C2V2 link reconfiguration, and soft capture ring extension complete.
SpaceX, Endeavor, copy all.
So those are where 4 of those 16 Dracos are housed, and we just heard that the soft capture extension has completed, which is a great milestone to hit as we are getting closer and closer to the International Space Station and docking just a few minutes from now.
Yeah, if we're excited about docking, I can only imagine what the crew really feels like. I'm sure, they've had a long journey to here, but once they get there and they ingress into the station, they'll be, hitting the ground running. We talked a little bit earlier about the volume of science experiments that they'll be completing while on orbit. Let's talk a little bit more in detail of what the 3 first-time flyers are bringing to the station. So first off, our AX-1 mission pilot, Larry Connor, has partnered with several research institutions across the U.S. to study aging, heart, and brain health. He'll be a participant in studies as well on heart function and brain and spine health. He will participate in tests and MRIs before and after the mission to really test the effects of microgravity exposure on the human body. He will also conduct cell cultures in space. He was specifically trained for this, to be able to handle these cells while on orbit. And he'll be studying how the aged cells respond to the microgravity and radiation of space as stressors as well. Next, our mission specialist 1, Eytan Stibbe, is conducting a variety of studies selected from across Israel in partnership with the Ramon Foundation and the Israel Space Agency. He will be monitoring eye health, cognitive performance, and stress while in space. Other topics selected for the Rakia mission that he's flying under will include the microbiome, fluidics and optics, plastics recycling, cardiovascular health, radiation protection, and other tests of technology and equipment. He will also be observing the Earth's atmosphere for thunderstorms to better understand how lightning is coupled in the upper and lower atmospheres. And on top of all of that, he will also be conducting several education and artistic activities to inspire children back home on Earth. This includes reading a Hebrew poem from space for the first time.
And Mark Pathy has partnered with multiple Canadian research universities, the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, and the Montreal Children's Hospital to conduct a variety of STEM studies. For the Montreal Children's Hospital, Pathy is examining musculoskeletal pain. The aim is to better understand the genetics and cellular pathways of pain and how the microgravity environment could contribute to pain sensation. Pathy will conduct in other biomedical experiments as well.
SpaceX Endeavor on the big loop. All visors down.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, we copy all. Expect a hold at waypoint 2 for ISS troubleshooting. Dragon systems remain healthy. Teams working on it. Stand by for more.
Understood. Copy all, and we'll be holding at waypoint 2.
So a quick update from the core. Things are all looking well, and we are going to be holding at waypoint 2, which is coming up in about a minute on screen now that we have an orbital night Dragon, and you can see all of the different Draco thrusters around the surface section of the capsule beginning to fire. All of these micro adjustments and micro movements are all autonomous from the Dragon vehicle. As Dan had mentioned, the Dragon vehicle is extremely smart, and so it knows where it's at, what it needs to do to maintain a position and dock successfully here in a couple of minutes.
So continuing on with Mark Pathy's research, he'll be participating in other biomedical experiments as well. He'll be wearing a biomonitor while exercising to record heart, lung, and circulation performance. He'll monitor changes in sleep and eye health, and he'll also test an augmented reality device intended to assist with medical care in the event of an emergency.
Houston Station on the big loop, we show ourselves in step 4 of 1.102, confirm it's on hold. Altitude looks good, and we are still waiting for video views.
Copy that, Tom. We are working on video right now. Stand by for more words.
So as we're approaching waypoint 2, let's head back over to Dan over at JSC for some more updates.
Hey, thanks. Thanks, Trisha and Andy. So as you heard, Dragon is at waypoint 2. So we're just 20 meters away from station, and we're holding here. All systems continue to be go. The mission director at Hawthorne has given their go for docking. We're currently just troubleshooting some video accessibility for the crew on board station before the station team's ready to give their final go for docking. So we'll just hang out here at waypoint 2. Again, this is why we build in these different kind of checkpoints along the way, and we go through a series of go no goes just to confirm everything's working as we expect before we continue in. So Dragon's just going to hang out here for a little bit, 20 meters away. The team's here on the ground in Houston troubleshooting video for the crew on board. They did report down that they're still getting good data from Dragon. It's in the proper attitude, so everything looking good from the station perspective. And as soon as we get this video troubleshot and figured out, we'll be ready to continue on with docking. It'll be pretty quick from that final approach, just 20 meters away to the docking. Again, we're going to have an initial contact and capture using the soft docking mechanism on board Dragon. It's been fully extended at this point, and it's going to link up with that international docking adapter that just has a passive mechanism on it. And then after that initial contact, the soft capture ring will start to retract on the docking system on board Dragon, bringing it in for a hard mate, at which point we'll be able to engage 12 hooks found around the nose cone section of Dragon to lock it in.
FYI, we're trying to send video to SSC-8.
Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground. The issue we're troubleshooting has to do with crew video from the centerline camera. Can you confirm that the Dragon crew is able to view the station through your
Yeah, copy. On the big loop on SSC-8, we see the same indications. We've got a counting up ET time, but no video indication.
Copy that. Give us 2 minutes, and we're hoping it'll be there.
SpaceX Endeavor.
Good, we'll let you know.
That's perfect. We have good video on both centerline 1 and centerline 2. Was that the question?
Dragon SpaceX copied the first half, did hear the words good video. If you could elaborate what the second half of the call was.
SpaceX Endeavor. My call was that we have good video on both centerline 1 and centerline 2 cameras and displays 1 and 3 respectively.
Copy all, Dragon. Thank you.
Okay, so just to walk you through what we're listening to right now, there is a centerline camera on the Dragon spacecraft, and that video gets transmitted wirelessly from the Dragon capsule over to the station using that C2V2, that common communication for visiting vehicles. That's that connection that's been sending data, voice, video between station and Dragon, allowing those crews to talk to each other, but also allowing...
Video should be on SSC-8. Can you check for us, please?
Yep, still no joy. We've got the lab camera pointed at that screen as well, so you can see what we're seeing.
Copy, we see it. Still assessing.
But again, essentially what we're trying to do is get the view from that centerline camera up to the crew, that they're able to watch that video through a display that has overlays just as part of the crew monitoring of that final approach as they're essentially in the chain of command for monitoring Dragon, and also potentially sending abort commands or anything of that nature. So one of our flight rules is we need that centerline video to be available to the station crew, and we did get confirmation that that camera is giving good video to the crew on Dragon. So the team's right now just troubleshooting a couple of steps to get that video to the SSC, the space station support computer that the crew's using for monitoring. So they're trying a couple of different computers. They're going to try a couple of resets and reconfigs to get that video up and running for the crew. So right now we're just hanging out at waypoint 2. We're about 20 meters away from the space station. We can continue to hold here while they troubleshoot. And again, we're just waiting for that video issue to get worked out for the crew, and then as soon as we get that, we can continue on with the docking, which will come shortly after we're able to depart waypoint 2. Again, we're just going to hang out about 20 meters away from
on
station.
the big loop, we copy potential version issue right there. Lost the end of your call as we went through a mask on KU.
And then getting some views inside the Dragon capsule, and one of the ones that we just had was that center line. So that's the video that we're working on getting up to the station crew, which they then will have on one of their station support computers, and it has an overlay over it that just shows a couple of different telemetry feeds
on the big
as
loop,
well, and that's
Houston,
just
sorry,
part of their setup.
KU. So yeah, on the Dragon docking monitor, the version that's open on the SSC-8 says Dragon docking monitor version 1.3. In the execute note, it says Dragon crew be version 3.1. So I don't know if those are just transposed or if there's actually a version misconfig, but what is possibly chosen on the SSCs is 1.3.
Copy, stand by.
And I can close and reopen that window while you're watching if you want to see the choices that come up.
In standby 1, we are assessing. Give us one more minute. And Raja, back with you on 2. First of all, thanks for giving us the added information. The configuration you're seeing with the 3.1 and the 1.3, those are expected. That's what we want you to see. For troubleshooting, what we want you to do is go to SSC 17 and SSC 8, close docking monitor on both, and then reopen only on SSC 8 in the lab. How copy?
We'll close Dragon docking monitor on 17 in the cupola and close it on 8 in the lab, and then reopen it only on 8.
Good copy, thanks.
Okay, Capcom Scott Zagati here in Houston, giving some troubleshooting steps to NASA astronaut Raja Chari on board the station. Again, Dragon right now, we're just holding at waypoint 2, just about 20 meters away from the station, while we troubleshoot an issue getting video from the Dragon centerline camera to the crew and their support computer on station. That's a requirement for their monitoring during this final approach. So Roger was just given the instructions to go to 2 of the different SSCs, the station support computers, one located in the station's cupola and then one located in the Destiny laboratory. And he's going to essentially turn the monitoring application off on the computer on both of those, and then return to the one in the Destiny lab to restart it, and hopefully that will fix our video issue. So everybody just on board.
It is reopen on 8. We're seeing similar indications with a counting up MET and a no video at the top.
Copy that. Stand by.
And so they're continuing to troubleshoot this view from Dragon, looking straight down the barrel of the International Docking Adapter, continuing to essentially just float stationary, just about 20 meters away from that docking port. Again, we're continuing to go through some IT support steps, some troubleshooting to get live video from that centerline camera from Dragon over to the station crew on their monitoring computers, as that's one of the requirements that's in place
Station
for
Houston
that
on the
final
big loop.
approach
You can
monitoring
please go
for the
hands
crew.
off on SSC-8. We're going to do some configuration from here.
We are hands off SSC-8.
Thank you.
And so now at this point, the crew is going to go hands off. So SSC, again, that station support computer, essentially just a laptop that's used. There's several of them throughout all of station that the crew uses to support different applications, different hardware, different experiments. So they're going to go hands off. And then the flight controller here in Houston, known as Pluto, will essentially serve as the IT support in this case. It's going to go on board and try and do some reconfiguration work remotely on the software. And then once we're able to get that centerline camera video up and running for the crew, we can proceed. So they're just holding Dragon 20 meters away. We have plenty of consumables, plenty of capability to remain here at waypoint 2 for an extended period of time to troubleshoot. So right now the AX-1 astronauts inside Dragon, suited up, visors down, just 20 meters away from the space station. And then while we continue to troubleshoot this centerline video issue, getting it to the crew, once we get that completed, we'll be able to proceed with docking. And so this was the first hiccup in a pretty smooth flight so far for Dragon on its way to the station. And all indications from Dragon not tracking any issues on the spacecraft, and they were able to confirm that we're getting that. Any issues on the spacecraft, and they were able to confirm that we're getting that centerline camera both on board, and we're able to see it down here on the ground. So just working the disconnect
Dragon,
and getting it towards the station crew.
Status update.
Go ahead, Jay.
Hey Mike, station is working through a video routing issue for them to see what you are seeing on displays 1 and 3. We obviously can't stay at waypoint 2 forever, but we are staying for now. We anticipate at least 2 hours of hold time limited by propellant, and I wish I could, but I can't comment for sure how long this hold will last. How copy?
Jake, believe me, we feel your pain. We understand what's going on. We'll stay here as long as you tell us.
Copy all, Dragon. Sit tight.
And we got an update from the core that we have at least 2 hours to troubleshoot. Hopefully not that long, but at least 2 hours of prop margin to continue to hold at waypoint 2 while they work this video routing issue. This is the last item, and then as soon as we get this centerline video up to the crew, we'll be able to proceed in with the docking. They'll have everything that they need for their approach monitoring capabilities on board the space station. And then we'll be able to proceed with docking. This is the centerline camera on Dragon looking straight down at the station. And again, we're directly above them. So you're starting to see some city lights pass in the distance there from those views. And we're going to continue in this orbital nighttime for about 13 more minutes, and then we'll see the sun start to rise We will have a couple of gaps coming up with some of our video coverage right around the same time the sun starts to come up. But otherwise, we should continue to get pretty steady views from the space station. Again, we're just holding at waypoint 2, Dragon just 20 meters away from its docking port. As teams here in Mission Control Houston troubleshoot a video issue, getting the view from that centerline camera on Dragon to the crew, to one of their support computers that they're going to use for monitoring during this final approach. And that's in our flight rules is just one of those items that needs to be operational before the teams can give the joint go to continue in. So the teams are discussing what our options are while they continue to work through this troubleshooting steps. But we've got approximately 2 hours of margin in the propellant for Dragon to just continue to hang here at waypoint 2, just about 20 meters away from the space station. So it's holding itself stationary, flying essentially in formation with the orbiting lab. And then once we get the centerline video issue fixed, we can proceed in with the docking. And at this point, the team here in Mission Control Houston has jumped in and has been running some remote steps from down here onto that support computer. The crew has gathered inside the Destiny laboratory on board station at one of our 2 monitoring stations, essentially. We have one down in the cupola, in the window that looks directly down towards the Earth, where Rajachari was initially for the monitoring. We also have an additional one in the Destiny lab, both also equipped with full robotics workstations that we use for controlling the space station's robotic arm, but also for these monitoring of these visiting vehicle operations. So the team's just continuing to figure out what the issue could be. Again, we've confirmed we've got good centerline video camera on board Dragon, and teams able to see it down here on the ground, and just trying to work what that disconnect is with the crew on station getting that video. And this is Mission Control Houston again. We're just continuing to hold for the moment, waiting for teams to troubleshoot a video issue on board. Again, one of the final systems we have to have in place.
Go ahead on the big loop.
Yeah, Roger, I wanted to give you an idea of what we're doing right here. So we have a primary plan where Pluto is currently working right now to try to get an alternate means to get you video using VLC. We are working on that right now. If that does not solve this issue here, our backup plan is that SpaceX has a ground pass coming by at 12:23, where they will be picking up video. So the alternate plan will be once we hit there, we're going to try to pipe in the video directly to you through that SpaceX ground site. That's what we're looking at right now. We currently are at about 2 hours left that we can stay at waypoint 2 at this point. How copy?
Okay, copy. VLC plan Alpha is the primary plan. We see that SSC-8 being worked, and then if that doesn't work, the backup plan is to try to get video piped in once we have a SpaceX ground coverage at 12:23, and copy about 2 hours of consumables to hold at current position.
Good copy. Thanks, Raja.
And we just heard a recap of our current situation from the Capcom here in Houston, Scott Zagidi. So again,
raised our visors, so check us on the way in if when we get cleared in.
Houston Station on 2 for crew constraint.
Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground. I have to apologize, I didn't get
Yeah, just checking in if the crew no exercise constraint bands that is currently about to expire, if that will be extended based on the current delay.
Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground. Can you repeat your last? I'm going to mute my other channels and listen only to you.
You know, Jake, I don't have the ability to do that, so I'd like to wait for this conversation to end on the big loop, and then I'll repeat it.
so a quick recap of our current situation. Crew Dragon Endeavour still holding at waypoint 2, just about 20 minutes away from its intended docking port on the International Space Station. We've got about 2 hours, a little less now, of consumables, essentially propellant, where we can continue to hold here at waypoint 2 while we troubleshoot an issue getting video over to the crew monitoring on board the space station. So that's one of the checks we have to have in place for their ability to monitor final approach. So the Pluto flight controller here in Houston is going through a number of steps right now, trying to get them video through an alternate path through a video program on board.
Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground, ready to copy.
Jake, what I was saying is, in anticipation of some kind of a protracted delay here, we have raised our visors, so be sure to double check with us if and when we get cleared to go back in.
Dragon, copy all. Visors raised and absolutely understand. We'll be in touch with any sort of forward plan. I'm sure you're copying on the big loop that troubleshooting is occurring on the ISS side. We've got a lot of chatter on the ground about what to do here. Thank you for your patience. Understand visors are up, and I'll be in touch with more shortly.
Good work, Jake. Thank you.
And the AX-1 crew taking their visors up, their suits not pressurized, as they continue to hold just 20 meters away from station. So again, we'll continue to hold here at waypoint 2. The team's here on the ground troubleshooting issues, trying to find now an alternate path to get that centerline camera video to Rajachari and the crew on station who have to monitor during that final approach. If their current troubleshooting doesn't work, we've got a ground pass coming up in about 25 minutes from now, where Dragon will be passing over a SpaceX supported ground site, which also has the capability to get that centerline video down, and then we'll have another option to try and route that over to the space station crew. So troubleshooting continued. We're going to wait until we get this centerline camera video up and running before we continue with the docking. But for now, we're just stepping through the troubleshooting. So with that, why don't we jump over and check in with Andy and Trisha, as again, we're just standing by here for this issue to get resolved. So Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Trish and I are also, standing by, and hopefully we hear good news from all of the folks here back on Earth trying to troubleshoot the video issue. As you had mentioned, it's been otherwise a very, very smooth ride uphill, and this is really the first hiccup that we've seen. So again, we have a couple of options that we are looking into, but for now, Dragon is just parked about 20 meters away at waypoint 2, waiting for a path forward. So Dragon has been on its journey to the International Space Station for about 20 hours now. And so after Dragon had separated from Falcon 9, it began what we call the activation and rendezvous phase of the mission. During this phase, Dragon was configured for on-orbit operations. This phase begins after Dragon separates from Falcon 9 and ends with the completion of the final co-elliptic burn.
The initial orbit that the Dragon was in was about 190 kilometers by 210 kilometers. Those values represented the perigee and the apogee of the orbit respectively, or in other words, the lowest and the highest point over Earth. That means that the orbit wasn't a perfect circle, but more like a slight ellipse.
Yeah, and over the next couple of hours, Dragon executed a series of burns which gradually raised its orbit to align more closely with the station. On screen right now is a graphic. So there are 4 major burns or firing of the Draco thrusters on Dragon that brought the spacecraft closer and closer to the ISS. The first was a boost burn. This is based on orbital data, and this raises Dragon's orbit until its orbit reaches an altitude of just 10 kilometers lower than the space station.
It was followed soon after by a close co-elliptic burn that placed Dragon on an orbit roughly co-elliptic with the space station, which means that the crew was about 10 kilometers lower than the station during the entire orbit around the Earth.
The third maneuver is the transfer burn, where we're raising Dragon's apogee, or the highest point of its orbit, to just 2.5 kilometers below the station. And then we rounded everything out with a final co-elliptic burn to once again maintain a constant orbit beneath the station, this time just 2.5 kilometers below it.
That's where we picked up to get into the approach initiation phase and the final stages of Dragon's rendezvous with the space station. This was also when integrated operations between the Dragon control team located here in Hawthorne and the space station flight controllers in Mission Control Houston started. The teams transitioned to integrated operations about 45 minutes right before approach initiation.
Yeah, that's really where we began our broadcast just over 2 hours ago. During the approach, SpaceX flight controllers worked in tandem with NASA teams in Houston to activate and test out a number of systems on Dragon, including the bidirectional communications that Dan mentioned earlier with the station using the C2V2 system, which stands for Common Communications for Visiting Vehicles. This also sets up data stream from Dragon to the station, giving another path for Dragon telemetry to come to ground and giving an additional command capability to astronauts aboard the station. We'll also maneuver Dragon to the proper attitude or orientation and initialize the navigation sensors used for the methodical approach to the station.
And a little bit of time ago, the Draco thrusters on Dragon fired for the approach initiation burn when the Dragon was about 2.5 kilometers below the station and just about 7 kilometers behind it. That swung Dragon up until it was about 400 meters directly below the station. And that maneuver also moved Dragon inside one of the 2 safety zones that Dan mentioned earlier around the station that required a set of go or no-go polls with the different control teams.
Yeah, the first zone is called the approach ellipsoid. It's essentially an imaginary shape measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, essentially a large 3-dimensional oval around the International Space Station. Before Dragon is given permission to move inside this ellipsoid, referred to the teams as the AE, it's configured to be what is known as a 24-hour safe trajectory. And what this means is that if Dragon were to somehow lose control of all of its thrusters, it would be at least 24 hours before its orbital path would take it inside of the approach ellipsoid.
So once Dragon arrived at 400 meters below the station, that was where it was the waypoint 0, which was the first checkpoint during Dragon's approach. The vehicle could hold at 400 meters, but in this instance continued on as all systems checked out to approach to waypoint 1 and through it.
Yeah, at this point, the teams passed through waypoint 1 and continued on to waypoint 2. This is where we're currently at, so we're inside that keep out sphere, which is, again, sort of another imaginary sphere around the International Space Station, this time 200 meters in radius. And at waypoint 2, we are currently holding to troubleshoot some video issues of a Dragon. So we have feed of Dragon looking at the docking adapter of the International Space Station. The folks here on ground can also see that video, but there is a disconnect between the video feed to the International Space Station. So there are a couple of paths that we are continuing to look at, and hopefully we get an update from the team soon and we can proceed with docking.